But first tonight, Anthony Albanese wanted Ed Husic out of the ministry, privately accusing him of disloyalty. And Labor sources say that the Prime Minister is now letting his deputy, Richard Marles, be the fall guy. To the bloodletting, division and enmities consuming Labor less than a week after its shock landslide win. While each political party is currently consumed by division, the Greens need to choose a new leader, while the Liberals are leaking against their rivals ahead of the party room meeting tomorrow. But none of this division is as astonishing as Labor's factional brawl that's erupted just days after one of their largest election victories. Labor's former Attorney General Mark Dreyfus was ready to resign before the last election after his wife Deborah passed away in November 2023. But Labor figures asked him to stay and again contest his seat of Isaacs. They were worried that if he stepped back, they'd risk losing the seat. They thought that Victoria was going to be a bloodbath. Now, Mark Dreyfus did them a favour, one that he presumably wouldn't have agreed to had he known that he'd be repaid with a shock demotion. And today, Dreyfus was dropped from cabinet altogether and replaced as Attorney General by Michelle Rowlands. And Ed Husic has also been dropped from the ministry, while Tanya Plibersek was dumped from Environment and given the Social Services portfolio. This makes Albanese's key rival invisible and continues his poor treatment and marginalisation of her. In other moves, Annika Wells takes on communications from Rowlands, while Anne Ali and Tim Ayres join Cabinet as Small Business and Industry and Science Minister, respectively. Mark Butler takes on the NDIS portfolio, this after Bill Shorten's departure. And despite not having solved the housing crisis, and far from it, Claire O'Neill now adds the new Ministry of Cities to her responsibilities. And this is about consolidating Labor's position in the cities and, well, their ambition is to confine the Liberals to be an outer regional party. It's also worth noting that the Labor cabinet still has a Muslim in Anne Ali, but there's now no Jewish minister. This matters when Penny Wong and Tony Burke push for Palestinian recognition, as they're likely to do this term. Who's there to argue against them? And it's the ruthless axing of Dreyfus and Husic that has upset many Labor MPs. Now, the Prime Minister tried to just dismiss this today.
Did you fight for either Mark Dreyfus or Ed Husic to stay in the ministry, and if not, why not?
Look, we have a process in the Labor Party caucus. You've been watching it for some time.
Senior Labor figures I spoke to today pointed to Dreyfus's age, 68. They said it was time for renewal and for younger talent. But the brutal act of this betrayal cannot be ignored. Dreyfus reportedly phoned Albanese on Thursday morning and asked him personally to intervene. Sam Maiden reports that a delegation also begged Albanese, but again, he declined to get involved. Now, given the size of Labor's victory, Albanese could have stopped the bloodshed if he wanted to. He could have told the Victorian right faction, led by his Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, that he wanted Mark Dreyfus to stay in cabinet. I mean, Albanese is up to his neck in factional politics, but he chose not to do this. Now, the full weight of anger from Labor MPs is currently being directed at Richard Marles, but there's also frustration at Albanese for failing to insist on unity and provide stability. Now, it's unclear precisely what the Prime Minister's beef is with Dreyfus, apart from the fact that he did speak in defence of Israel in cabinet meetings. But it's well known that Albanese has been unhappy with Ed Husic for a while. He's concerned that he's been disloyal and he's blamed him for leaks. Whether that's accurate or not, that was the Prime Minister's perception. One Labor source told me today, Albanese absolutely wanted him out. Now, it's convenient for the Prime Minister that Richard Marles is wearing the blame for Husic's demotion. And it's no accident that that is how this narrative is being portrayed. But in truth, it had very little to do with Richard Marles at all. His faction simply had their fourth spot returned to them. It was lost when Bill Shorten retired. And it was Albanese's socialist left faction that demanded an extra spot in cabinet. And the New South Wales right could have dumped Tony Burke or Chris Bowen or Jason Clare, who has a pretty low profile. But they chose. It was Ed Husick's own faction who chose to get rid of him. And they did so in the full knowledge that it was Albanese's preferred outcome. And now, a week after their landslide victory, when you'd think they'd all be celebrating, instead, all of this dirty laundry has been aired in public. Now, Ed Husick described Richard Marles as a factional assassin on the ABC yesterday.
The difficult issue here is that we've had sort of barefaced ambition and a Deputy Prime Minister wield a factional club to reshape the ministry. I think when people look at a Deputy Prime Minister, they expect to see a statesman, not a factional assassin.
Now, he couldn't come out as strongly against the Prime Minister or against his own faction. He might need them for a promotion down the track. But he did say that Albanese could have intervened, given the authority he now wields over the party.
The PM had great authority coming out of the election. I think if he'd exercised it in a way that provided for stability and a strong team that had been there and could go forward, no one would have quibbled about that.
So I was going to ask you about the role of the Prime Minister. Do you think he should have intervened or not?
Well, of course, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here with false modesty, of course.
And Ed Husick will not go quietly. Labor MPs have already launched an extraordinary spray describing Richard Marles, their Deputy Prime Minister, as dumb and nasty in this news.com.au article written by Sam Maiden. And she reports that Labor MPs were scathing, however, of the brutality of the post-election reshuffle, with one describing the factional power brokers as sociopaths. Albanese has unfettered power now, a Labor source said. He could have used that power to protect frontbenchers, and he didn't. Sam Ray is Richard Marles's numbers man. And Sam Ray is one of those that the Victorian right now has in the ministry. Albanese's message in response to this infighting was to publicly say that the Labor Party is greater than any individual.
Government brings with it responsibility, and no individual is greater than the collective, and that includes myself. And we need to approach this term with humility to make sure that we deliver on the commitments that we made to the Australian people, but also that we operate in a way which shows solidarity.
That was his public appeal for unity when chaos was erupting. But then at the caucus meeting, Maiden reports that he didn't even acknowledge or thank the two ministers who'd been dumped, Dreyfus and Husick. And besides, Albanese was the one behind Husick's dumping. Now, this is the true nature of the ruthless Prime Minister, who doesn't look after his own and only cares about his own tenure in the lodge. This is who Dreyfus is making way for in the ministry, Sam Ray, who today became the Minister for Aged Care. He's a former Victorian State Secretary, a factional heavyweight, and very close to Richard Marles. He's young, he's known for his unique hairstyle, but he is powerful. And that means, as Sam Maiden points out, that Labor ministers Claire O'Neill, Mark Dreyfus, Peter Khalil, and MP Josh Burns, Tim Watts, Cassandra Fernando, and so many others owe their seats or take their orders from him. Maiden writes that this sort of conduct might pass as normal in Dan Andrews' Victorian Labor Party, but it's not the way things are done at the federal level. But the overarching picture here is that the left faction now has control within the Albanese government. And Cameron Milner writes tonight in the Nightly that the Labor right, the usually the more sensible faction, is now powerless to stop the excesses of the left. He says that this is the case on everything from negative gearing, recognition of Palestine, legislating the voice, promoting puberty blockers on the PBS and more. And Cameron's going to be on the show a bit later to talk about what he says is the radical agenda that Labor has planned. Now, Milner writes that Australia didn't vote knowingly for this radical left agenda, but they are about to get the lesson rammed down their throats ad nauseum. And that's because Albanese and Penny Wong and co will say that they have the mandate for this radical reform with their 90-plus seats. Never mind the fact they only took a small target agenda to the election. You know their arrogance will be insufferable. But if they're leaving powerful and disgruntled and loud figures in their wake, like Ed Husic and Mark Dreyfus, perhaps they're just the start, then one thing is for sure, it's not going to be smooth sailing for the Albanese government.